Hi there, welcome back here to Tabletop Sagas. Brett here with another update for you on my Medieval Asia project. Now, I thought today that we could branch out a little bit and have a look at a new on the scene sculptor known as Ten Kingdom Miniatures. I know that some of you aren't sure maybe on 3D printing, but if I can use the words from Ten Kingdom Miniatures here, the beauty about ancient wargaming are the hundreds of armies across the centuries and continents. However, the financial reality is that most companies can only focus on the popular Romans, Greeks, Viking, and Biblical era. This has left large gaps in the market served by one or two companies, often with old sculpts. Now, this may be a little bit over the top, but it is more of an exaggeration of the truth rather than an outright lie. There is limitations that larger companies and even individual casters do have. Their ranges need to accommodate that. A single person, however, selling STL files that you can print off and effectively manufacture at home can really plug in this gap. And it's still a viable financial option for them as well. So why not join me for a little bit here today and let's dive in and see what Ten Kingdoms has to offer. So here we've got the first unit of Song that I'm going to be trying to properly paint up, and I thought I'd do a quick first look at them. I have picked up their 10mm army bundle, so we have got a good bit of choice for expanding out the army in the Imperial segment, I guess you'd say, of the army. So let's have a bit of a look at what we've printed and what I think of these. So we've got here a general for commanding the division, guy in heavy armor and a horseback. Seems like a good place to start. You will notice with these minis as well, I have primed them in a brown color this time rather than my typical red. The reason being is that I do think that a red will go over these perfectly fine. Metal should go over these better than reds. And I'm testing a theory that this is actually a better base color to be starting from for pretty much all of the paints that I plan to be using on these minis. And we can see here that the resin 3D printed minis are amazing detail, a lot better, I've got to admit, than the irregular minis, although they do lack some of the advantage that irregular has in terms of durability of the metal. You can see here the sword is a little bit warped, not uncommon in the metal mini as well. But I mean, look at that flex on that. That is a very thin piece of resin, and it's not impossible that that could snap in the very near future. Let's see if I can find an example of that. Have I got any on this one? Because I have already started to have a couple of breaks, and that is not great, shall we say. Of course, I can't find any now. There we go. I've just spotted one. Here we've got a guy. Let's see if we can get this focus. Yep. So tassel on his head has unfortunately broken off. I think I have also lost somewhere. Maybe not on this one, but I have lost one of these extra bits coming off the crossbows. But that's, that's the nature of the game, unfortunately, sometimes with resin minis, unfortunately. So here we can see we're going heavy infantry with spears, a couple of crossbows as well to represent the fact that they did use an awful lot of crossbows in the armies. And the detail on these models, again, really nice. You can see the metal armor. You can see if I can get, let's see how close I can get. And look at those faces. That is a face you could actually paint. I'm not going to beyond a base and a wash and then a little bit of a highlight, but still far nicer. And this is basically where we're at starting. I've got them primed, I've got the base coat done, and we're going to start picking out those details on these minis now. Working from the outside in for the clothes, I decided that I would start by adding in my typical variation to the underclothes that these miniatures are wearing. This was done by picking out a few minis per strip and painting in the cloth parts under the leg armour and around the elbows in a lighter khaki colour, and then picking others to have some black boots. This is a lot less variation than I would recommend on other miniatures that I've painted in the past and painting guides that I've done in the past, but my thinking here is there's a lot of variation in the sculpts compared to previous miniatures from companies such as, say, Irregular Miniatures that we've been painting up in previous videos. So I'm hoping that this will also help to add variation to my models. While I've got some black on the palette as well, I would recommend that you go in and pick out the hair and the beards and get all of that out of the way now. When batch painting like this, I always like to paint everything of one colour all at the same time. This just means that you aren't switching between paints quite as often, and particularly when using a wet palette like myself, you won't be wasting quite as much of your precious paints. By that same logic, I'm also going to get all the wooden parts done in one go as well. So for this, I'm just grabbing a slightly darker brown for a bit of variation and getting that onto the spear shafts and the crossbows. These miniatures do come with a nice option of with or without crossbows hanging from their sides, and I've got to commend Ten Kingdoms here for this one again, as it was a suggestion from the community that prompted them to offer both options. In my previous painting videos, I've always recommended painting the metals with a black base coat before applying the metal paints. However, for these I've decided to try skipping that step and go straight in with the metals. My thinking here is that the brown is a lot less in your face than a red if it were to shine through, and should cover well enough for these miniatures. And that's what I found to be true. The spear tips I did find could use a second coat on them, as the large flat areas did need a little bit extra to get good coverage, but overall the armour itself was fine with a single coat, and it felt good to save a bit of time skipping that step. For the skin, I stuck to my paint recipe that I've been refining and using over this entire project, and that's just by using a tanned flesh colour to minimise the amount of red that's in the skin, which isn't as present in Asian skin tones as it is in Caucasian skins. It's always worth remembering that Asian skin isn't yellow, as the slightly inappropriate convention might go with, and I found that focusing more on limiting the red is a far better option. Normally I would be painting this over a red base coat, so there would still be a little bit coming through to give a little bit of that life and almost the impression of blood underneath the skin, but not this time, and I guess we'll see in the later stages how this looks, and if there's anything that takes away from the miniatures by having that base coat be slightly different. We're on to the home stretch of the base coats now, and I've got to admit by this point my hope for using a brown base coat to save some time on the painting definitely hasn't panned out. There were some definite time saving advantages to using the brown, but I think that it's also cost me in some other areas as well. Coupled with my pretty methodical, slow painting style, and yeah, I don't think I've got a big difference in times, if any at all. But that's okay. I paint because I enjoy it, and an army skill project isn't a small endeavour at the best of times. Anyway, it's always going to take a while, no matter what you try and do. With that said, while working on the red detailing here, I did decide to take some inspiration from my Mongol forces that I've been painting as well, namely in the choice to not paint any of the horses' harnesses until the detailing stage. For these, I want all the armour sections lined with a red, but I suspect that once I apply the wash stage, this will get a bit lost and basically need to be completely redone during the highlighting stage anyway. So to avoid this issue, I just skip them in this step and we'll put them in later sections when it comes to the highlighting. I do, however, paint any of the larger red sections where you'd want a bit more variation and vibrancy in the colour, so that's the banners and the tassels for the weapons themselves. On to the final step before we give these minis a good overall wash, and we're going to pick out some of the smaller details that I think will benefit from blending in, but I still want to make sure that they're there. First up, we've got the feathers on the crossbow bolts. If you've checked out my earlier videos on painting up the Song archers, you'll know that I really like the pop of white that these give to the unit, so I make sure to pick them out to add a bit more interest to anybody who's taking the time to inspect the units, as I think it helps draw the eye to the fact that these miniatures aren't purely melee units, but also have some ranged capabilities as well. Then there's also some detailing around the helmets that I go in a bronze to help it jump out a little bit more from the other metals. Again, I am really impressed by the 10 Kingdom miniatures here. At this level of fine detail that you're getting in a 10mm scale model, this is just something I haven't seen achieved with metal casting offerings, and I want to make sure that I'm showing off this detail as much as I can, while still balancing that with speed and efficiency, given that there is so many of these that would be required for an army. Now we're on to the nice easy stage, and I'm going to cover the entire model in a brown wash. I'm sure that you could use a black for this, and it would really help to give the contrast and that additional pop to the colours, but a brown is going to blend better with the colours that I've chosen, the reds, browns obviously, and even to an extent the metals. I just think it gives a nicer overall effect without having to do multiple washes in order to get not much better of a result. For this, I wouldn't worry too much about being neat. It is an all over wash after all, and you just want to get the minis covered, but do be careful with pooling. You do want it in the recesses, but not so much that it becomes massive puddles. Particularly with this, you're going to be wanting to watch out between the legs. Because of the size of the models, I've found that in the past, as these start to dry, if you put too much wash on them, then the surface tension of the liquid can actually form a skin between the two legs, which you definitely don't want. Just keep an eye out for this, and if you do notice a lot of it starting to pool between the legs, then just go in with a damp brush, not too wet, just a little bit, and hold that in the area for maybe a second, probably less, and you will see that the brush does wick that additional wash away. After giving these models an hour or so to fully dry, I can then come back in and finish up the models by re-establishing those brighter colours. As always though, this is not something that I'm going to be doing with everything. Instead, I just want to focus on 3 main colours. In this case, I choose the red, the skin and the metal, the same as I have been for the entirety of the song project. I won't cover the skin too much in this, as that is just going back in with my base colours and being careful to avoid the recesses, so just hitting the ends of the noses, the cheeks, the hands and such. The banners and tassels are also relatively easy. We just want to go in, but rather than doing big blocks of colour, just focusing on some scratchy highlights on the outer and upper parts of the fabrics to give it a nice fade up into the bright red. As with previous banners though, I'm not going to attempt to do any designs here. I still haven't seen any information on what would be displayed on these banners, and I don't think anybody wants to see me attempt to do Chinese characters anytime soon without having any knowledge on them. The red detailing that I previously mentioned though is going to take a little bit more work. We aren't going to be doing anything fancy here, but it's just an exercise in patience to go around with a fine tipped brush and doing in effect a thick edge highlight on the armour sections. If I can give you any tip for this, it would definitely be to consider how much paint you're loading up into your brush. You want the bristles to be saturated, but you don't want any beads of paint sitting on top of those bristles. If you do, that's a ticking time bomb. It's just a recipe for disaster where you'll end up getting a big blob somewhere where you inevitably press a little bit harder than you intended to. So just go slow, enjoy yourself, take your time, and you'll get there in the end. If all else fails and you do find that this does happen a little bit, don't worry too much. You can always go in and reapply some metals to neaten this up, put on a little bit of wash and get back to where you are. But if it's not too big, or if it's in an area that you can't see too clearly, then remember that we are going to be highlighting the metals up shortly anyway, and that should also help to cover up some issues. We're finally onto the silver of the weapons and the armour. For these, the weapons were a simple process of just highlighting back up with the base colour, but I took a slightly different approach for the armour, and I thought that was worth discussing with you here. Thanks to the amazing details on these miniatures, you can actually see the texture of the individual chain links in the armour on these minis, so I wanted to try and pick that out where I could. Don't worry though, we aren't going to be trying to paint each one. I do want to preserve some of it if at all possible. To do that though, you are going to want to do some effective dry or overbrushing technique. Now I'll admit that this is a technique that I'm far from an expert in. The general idea is wiping off most of the paint on a towel and then lightly running the brush over the area that you want to paint so that it only picks out the raised parts. Unfortunately for these details, they aren't quite pronounced enough on the 10mm scale for these to work 100%, and I was definitely getting paint in between the links as well, but I think it's still worth it doing it this way, and it does pick out a little bit of that detail, certainly enough for 3 foot away where you should be able to see the armour. So there we have it, an extra couple of units to add to the ever-growing collection, and some really amazing variety that I can add to my Southern Song forces. I'll throw up some photos either side here for you to check out, but see what you think. Let me know down in the comments. Are they any good? Would they be something that you'd be happy to put into your force? Hopefully this video has given you a good idea of the kind of quality that 10 Kingdoms is offering, and maybe it's something that might be of interest to you if you're looking for some 3D printed files. They do offer these in 28, 15 or 10mm scale, and of course, because they're STL files, you can always rescale them to whatever you would like, really. Now, I know that this era is a little bit of a niche here, and it's not going to be right for everybody, but that is the beauty of 3D printing, that we can be tailored to exactly with what we want rather than trying to just cover the largest number of people possible. And these miniatures really do show the capabilities of just how much detail you can get from these. You know, these photos, you can see the faces in them, and I know that's something that I harp on about all the time, but it really is a big deal for me that I can actually see the eyes, or maybe more the eyelids, the nose, the mouth, the upper lip, the lower lip, the chin, really see that detail, and it is refreshing and great to see. And this is an area of the hobby that's really exciting to me, and I look forward to seeing how it goes in the future. But anyway, I'm already a member of 10 Kingdoms Tribes on my mini factory, and I don't think that's going to be changing anytime soon. I do know they have already completed their Khitan Liao dynasty. They've just finished their Song dynasty, and they are now working on the Jurchen Jin Empire, which is going to be a really exciting one to add to this project. And if I recall correctly, I believe they are going to be focusing on Koreans as well in the near future. So lots to keep an eye out on there. But let me know now what you think. You know, are these miniatures something that are of interest to you? What's your opinion on 3D printing and how it fits in with the historical wargaming hobby? As always, do consider subscribing here at Tabletop Sagas if you want to see more of the Medieval Asia project. I also, as well, in the very near future, do have another project that I'm working on that I will be showing off in the coming weeks. Although I'm not going to spoil that one yet for you. Hit that subscribe button and you will get notified as soon as that does come out. And I've been Brett. Thank you very much for spending your time with me today, and I'll see you in the next one.